Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm Gary Joyce, Managing Partner of Genesis, and I'm an investor in isquared. I'm delighted to kick off this event introducing isquared, a company that's helping organizations to unlock the hidden potential in their data. Let's be honest, most businesses today are sitting on mountains of valuable data, but aren't quite sure how to make sense of it all. The business has collected the data, you know there's gold in there somewhere, but turning it into something meaningful, that's where things get tricky, and that's exactly where isquared comes in. isquared isn't here to sell complicated systems or confuse you with technical jargon. It's here to simplify complexity. It takes the data that you already have and helps you to see what it's really telling you about customers, operations, opportunities for growth, your brand performance. But it doesn't stop at insights. isquared works closely with clients to translate those insights into concrete strategic business decisions that can drive real results. For over 2 decades, Tim and his colleagues have been in the trenches with organizations just like yours, answering questions that keep decision makers up at night. What are we missing in our data? How do we turn these insights into smart business moves? Which decisions will actually drive growth and which are just distractions? What does AI mean for the future of our business? Well, enough about isquared. Let's meet our panel. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to hear from people who are expert in using data and people who have interesting perspectives on what disruptive technologies might mean for business, people who are advising disruptive startups in the field, and we have a really altogether intriguing mix of opinions, experience, and knowledge to share with you today. So let me introduce the panel. We have Paul Farrell, who is CEO of Hibernia College. Paul has held a number of senior positions in Ireland, including as Managing Director of Virgin Media Television, Director of Strategy and Marketing at Davy Stockbrokers, Commercial Director at the Irish Times, and Managing Director at IPG Media Brands. He is a successful business leader with a track record delivering across a range of sectors, business types, and geographic markets. We are delighted to have Amy Neal. Amy is General Partner with Delta Partners, the venture capital firm, and before joining Delta Partners, she was Global FinTech Lead at MasterCard. Amy is highly sought after as a speaker at conferences on technology and FinTech trends, early stage venture investing, corporate venture investing, and corporate innovation. We are also delighted to have David Kerrigan, technology futurist, author, and international keynote speaker on emerging technologies. David began his career in telecoms as a technical writer over 20 years ago and has worked as a consultant with leading global companies. David is an advisor on the practical application of disruptive technologies to businesses, and he also writes on how technology impacts society and individuals. Jack Dunn is CEO of Dimply. Like myself, she's a woman with a man's name. Dimply supports people on their digital financial journey, ultimately aiming to help consumers feel and think better about money. Central to Dimply's work is collaborative partnerships with financial institutions, empowering them to transform their data into valuable financial insights that benefit their customers. And finally, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Tim Farmer. Tim leads the team at isquared as CEO. He has a gift for looking at jumbled data and spotting patterns that other people miss, and then translating those patterns into strategic recommendations. He will explain how isquared helps organizations cut through the data noise, focus on what really matters, and make decisions with confidence. Tim will lead this discussion with our panel of experts today. So without further ado, let's get started and learn from our panel about how they think and feel about data, analytics, AI, and how these things can be leveraged to support greater efficiency, greater insights, and better decisions. Tim and panelists, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you very much for the introduction there and the kind words. So welcome, everyone. I'm really looking forward to the session here this morning. And Gary's already given us an introduction to our 4 fantastic panelists. But if I could maybe start with just 1 or 2 minutes from each person here. If you could just tell us a little bit more about your views in this respect. Gary's given us the introduction, but talk to us about how decisions are made in your industry, and how important empirical evidence or data is within that decision-making process. A big question, but if it's possible to give us a snapshot quickly, that'd be great to start us off. I'm going to start, I think if we start with Paul in top left, that'll be brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. Nice, juicy question to get going with. Yeah, I mean, for me, throughout my career, I think there's always been a shift or a polarization where within organizations, people have traditionally seen data as power, and people like to hold and retain that data to almost, justify their impact and influence and kind of role in the business. And what I found, increasingly in driving success is, having a very clear focus on the democratization of that data and understanding, what is relevant in that. I think, as Gary said in the introduction, there's a wealth of data and it's getting bigger and bigger every day. You can look at everything you possibly want to from a customer point of view, from a financial point of view, from an operational process point of view. And I think the challenge for businesses is zoning in, as Gary said, into the one or two things that really will influence that, and then having an insight as opposed to an analysis of it. And that's what I found is the challenge now for a lot of companies, and particularly for us in Aberni, is what is the insight we're taking with this data and how do we action it, or how does it make things better? So I think, the data lakes and the data warehouses and all this kind of jargon that you pick up is getting bigger and bigger and more complex. And the challenge, I think, for industry and businesses and experts is to zone in on the one or two things that will make a difference, and then make that accessible to people who can share in the evolution of kind of that improvement and that actioning.
Fantastic, thank you. And I think that picks up on some key points that we'll come back to in and around accessibility and literacy as well, which I think are really important points in terms of really driving effectiveness. So I think maybe the same question now to Amy, if you could.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this really interesting panel. I started my career in the research space, where empiricism and data was absolutely kind of the bedrock of everything that I did. And I feel like that foundational experience has informed everything that I've done through my career, which has been really interesting. The sort of the last 20 years, we've talked about data an awful lot, and it's only in the last couple of years that actually the true power of data is revealing itself, with new operating platforms arising as a result of some of the things we've seen around AI. So it's an incredibly interesting time to be having this conversation. Today, my job is to invest in early stage companies where I have a couple of things that I have to do from a decision-making point of view. The first is deciding which companies to invest in on behalf of my investors, which companies are likely over a period of time to make positive returns for our investors. And then the other thing that I have to do is support those companies through their journey of business building. In both of those tasks, data is absolutely the bedrock of everything that we do, but it's not all that we do. So I have a very sort of interesting perspective. An early stage company has very little data to go on. It's often a brand new team that has an insight and is building on that insight, and therefore they don't have financial track record. They have a perception of the product that they're going to build, but they don't have huge amounts of data to validate that product. So I guess the perspective that I'd like to bring today is, how do you balance both sort of data on the one hand, and then the need for non-data informed decisions on the other hand?
Absolutely, no, really interesting. And I think we'll pose the same question to Jack now.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so my background has been financial services, and data being the bedrock of everything pertaining to decision making, results, complying with regulation, etc. So, a little like what Amy just mentioned, we've seen over the last number of years a very different shift in terms of how we analyze data. One of the challenges most industries have encountered is access to the data, and really understanding where the data is and surfacing that data in a way that you can make an informed decision. So, we talk about the empirical evidence and maybe the risk assessment around looking at data and making informed decisions and generating and creating real patterns. We're obviously in an era now that is much easier to do with modern technology, etc. But I guess the component of looking at, say, Dimply and what we do and what we bring is looking at the data and surfacing an insight that helps make a more informed decision, and orchestrating the data in a way that actually informs both individuals and corporates to be able to make that decision. So we've come a long way. There's no question. I go back to my early days in the 80s when we were operating from cash books and manual ledgers to where we are today, and it's exponential. And I think what I'm hoping from today is that we get a sense of that exponential growth, and the exponential growth that's about to come with AI as well, and what that means from a data perspective. So delighted to be here, Tim, and thank you for having me.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for that. And again, it picks up on the theme of accessibility, surfacing insight in terms of supporting decision making. And you mentioned AI, at which point I think, David, over to you in your views here.
So I mean, I would try to say something that everybody else hasn't said already, but I think what I've observed is a lot of it comes down to the ownership. So the fact that in so many organizations who are progressive enough to see the value in data, they're still operating it in a silo. If there's a data team or an analytics team, and they're not connected in with the business decision makers. And there may be an element of a cliche of people don't know what they don't know. So they take a dashboard and they think that's analytics. It's like, oh, we have a dashboard. We're making informed decisions now and we're data first. But so many times they're not able to join the dots and figure out, well, do I have the right data? Do I have the data that I need, not the data that IT thinks I need? And that's certainly a perspective that I'll have later on when we talk about AI, that this is not an IT problem. This is a business problem. We have to make sure that everybody is involved and upskilled around what they need to know to do their job better.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I think that gives us a really good introduction to where we're going to start today and what we want to get out of it. And as I said, when we talk about data is a broad world in that respect, and AI is very much part of that. The two are sort of symbiotic to a large extent nowadays. Can I just start with a sort of a question here? It's sort of beyond the headlines. Where do you really see AI in terms of transforming, or what role it has in terms of decision making today? And I might start with you there, David, based on the comment that you were just making.
So I think where I see AI is, there's a problem for most people now that it's everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. People are all talking about it, but they haven't figured out what to do. So I think there's a few steps we need to go through to see, like, what is AI? I mean, such a small little word, but it means so many different things to different people. And I always start the conversation with people to say, look, AI means different things to different people. It is having a different impact on a different timeline in different sectors, in different departments in the same company, and for different individuals. So we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to it. You need to have the more granular view and say it's going to affect different things in different ways. And then the second part for me is around, I think AI is going to evolve where we'll start hopefully with the easy things. So it's going to automate things that we already do, and that's great. But for me, it will be a failure if that's all we manage to do with AI. We need to see, yes, we can automate the things we already do them faster, do them cheaper, and that's great. But what more can we do? What are the things we couldn't do before that we now can do? And because we've automated the things we were doing, we should have time to do them. But the biggest challenge, I think, for most organizations is just making the time, the headspace to figure this out. This is hard. This is, a reimagination of business processes, of technology, new skill sets. And it's a classic innovator's dilemma in terms of people are so busy with their day jobs, they can't find the time to even understand the space, let alone go ahead and implement the practical projects that will make a difference.
Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting point about the innovator's dilemma. And I think we've got a number of people here on the panel who can actually talk with experience on that as well. I think in terms of Paul, Amy, and Jack in that respect. I mean, is there anything that you would add beyond what David said there?
I'll jump in. Sorry, Jack. When I think about the innovator's dilemma, you know, the perspective of the early stage company is really, really helpful to more established companies as well. So as I mentioned before, early stage companies have very little data to go on. But what I'm seeing is that they are using AI in really interesting ways to glean insights at very low cost with very low head count. So there's this incredible movement going on right now where AI is being leveraged by startups to create efficiencies that I think that larger companies are not yet thinking about in terms of what they can do and what they can achieve with the new tools that are emerging. I was talking to a founder last week, an incredibly early stage company. There's actually only 3 of them in the team, a CEO, a chief product officer, and a CTO. And he was telling me that the CTO's perspective is that he won't be recruiting a team of 14 engineers to build out the product. He'll be building the product using the new tools that are coming on board that are replacing the need for engineers. So in terms of the innovator's dilemma, I think for larger, more established companies, it's not just about looking left and right to see where the threat is coming from in terms of who's bringing new products to market. It's looking left and right to see who's doing that at speeds that you simply can't compete with.
Brilliant. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
For a quick moment, Tim, just to echo what Amy's saying, but I think also there's been a significant shift in the past couple of months in particular, when we look at the AI reasoning and the logic behind that. And I think the whole contextualizing has really shifted that innovative space. So Amy's right. When you look at it from an innovation perspective, in particular smaller companies, time is critical. And time to decision making is obviously quite costly. So the ability to leverage AI, but having now that strategic insight of where the AI reasoning really gives you that contextual view. So we've gone from, shifted, the paradigm has significantly shifted from looking at opaqueness in predictions to really having, kind of evidence based on the back of those decisions. And I think that is going to be a game changer and continue to be a game changer. And I might just finish on, I was at a wonderful event yesterday in London with MasterCard, and there was some amazing conversations around AI and where things are going. And the resounding message that came from it was it is exponential. So it's kind of like, when we went from the traditional phone to the smartphone, something quite similar, and it's going to continue growing at a pace that we all need to be prepared to move at that same pace. So I think from an innovation perspective, it's absolutely going to accelerate.
Fabulous. It's Moore's law on drugs, basically, at that point, maybe. So, okay, Paul, I mean, are you seeing it from, obviously, I know you have a broad range of experience as well, but from in your sector, in the education sector?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pervasive. I mean, I think, I've kind of worked in publishing and media and telecoms, who've all been significantly disrupted by, different evolutions and advances in technology. And I think we're at another stage now. But it's funny, from a Hibernia point of view, like I would see us as an ed tech business. We are a college, we are an educational institution, but we rely on a platform to deliver 60 to 100% of our programs. And AI is starting to become more and more central to that. But if you go back to the point David made about culture and innovation and ownership, I think for me that's central. And linking to what Amy and Jack have said, startups have a very different approach to embracing technology out of need, necessity, and their own kind of DNA. And I find culturally, as David said, within organizations, and AI is now going to accelerate that, there is a reluctance and a caution as to whether it's governance or fear or just kind of conservatism to embrace it. And I think the cultures and the organizations that are starting to embrace it and understand the power of AI and data together are the ones that will succeed. But it's not new. I mean, I think I'm a big fan of behavioral economics and Dan Ariely and the likes of the Freakonomics guys. You know, if you look at what they've done for data, I mean, it's taking the data and back to that insight and transitioning. So, you know, Lemonade for me is a great case study as an insurance business that basically relies on AI and technology to inform its propositions and its customer experience. And there's loads of them, and not that that's just one, but then that comes down to a culture of embracing data and technology across every facet of the business to make things better. And I think that's where companies and organizations will win or lose now in terms of how they kind of get that right.
So I'm going to take us sort of back now more broadly to data and analytics, and we've touched on a fair amount of this already, and particularly, and thank you when you were giving your introductions. But where do you see the real benefit of empirical or data-driven decision making? What real benefits do you see that it drives for your organisations?
I guess, like everything, it's the validation of assumptions. So if you think about decision makings we make based on data, they need to be informed. So access, first of all, to the data. And secondly, then in terms of the insights, perhaps, that you're surfacing on the back of that data. So twofold, if I look at Dimply, and what we're doing in terms of supporting organizations make better financial decisions, use data to hyper-personalize experiences and surface insights. But if I look at us internally and making informed decisions around what we're doing next, you know, the compliance around what we started to do, the validating in terms of the strategy, that comes with making informed decisions. That comes with some analysis. Amy mentioned earlier around, you know, the access to some data can be challenging also. But it is very important that firstly, you can trust the data. So in anything any of us are doing, you got to trust it, because in financial services, obviously, we're regulated and governed by rules and regulations that we need to make sure those standards are adhered to. So back to the point around, one is having that appetite, I guess, from a risk perspective, that you're comfortable with, you know, making a decision at a point in time. You know, we can spend a lot of time analyzing data and the analytics of data, to David's point earlier around a dashboard, but it is really around, okay, what is the outcome? What is it you want to get from it? And then taking that informed strategic decision, with including human biases, if you're basing it based on us looking at kind of from a management perspective and a team. But then if you're going to augment that with AI, it is around, you know, validating the accuracy and the fact base around the information, with surfacing the insight, because like we all know, garbage in is garbage out.
Yes.
That's an old pun we've all used from years ago. But it is also having the ability to make a decision based on at a point in time, because otherwise, you know, you could lose a lot of time in terms of doing that analysis and the evidence of that data, and also that data could become out of date very, very quickly. And I mean, that's obviously what we're seeing with exponential reams of data together with where the data is coming from. So all of that, I think, is a huge factor. So from a Dimply perspective, we have to think and make decisions very quickly. But those decisions in terms of what we're putting into our platform have consequences for, you know, the organizations we're dealing with. So we need to be able to stand over them. So I guess the point I'm making is, once we can risk assess and be confident with what we're doing and have an agile approach that we can change accordingly and conform to the rules and regulations of the industry we're serving, we're very comfortable in terms of doing that.
Fantastic, thank you. And from your point of view, David, I mean, I know you're looking in, and you must have a view there in terms of, I know we talked about AI, but what are the big benefits? And I guess, what's the difference between those who do embrace data and those who don't, is probably another way to look at that.
I think it's the speed that they can operate at, and being able to be more productive and be able to, you know, extend the capacity of their resources by empowering it with AI and by using data to actually drive the business quickly. Moving away, like I remember from my days in telecom, like we had a super analytics team, but you know, it might take a month before I'd get a report back from them. So being able to shorten those timelines and move the data closer to the decision point is really important. And then just to pick up on the governance and regulation side. So one of the things, we've talked about how organizations maybe are a little bit slow, a bit wary to embrace AI, partly because it's moving so fast, they don't know when to jump on, but also then the concern about the quality. So the old garbage in, garbage out thing, absolutely true. But I've just finished a big project working on AI literacy and the requirements under the AI Act. And I think at least that gives people a little bit of a benchmark to say what is expected of us. How do we now have some guardrails in place so that if we're ready to embrace our AI journey, we've got something to measure it against. We know what the obligations are. We know what the requirements are. And I think that gives the more conservative people a little bit of comfort that they can say, well, yes, we're going to put some governance in place. We're going to have our governance structures there, and we have a benchmark to work against.
Yeah, and I think really interesting when you talk about the AI Act, because there is that sense for a couple of years. And again, I know thinking about since the hype and the launch of freely available Gen AI, whereas AI has been around longer, but a feeling of being in the Wild West to some extent. I mean, I've been at conferences when people have talked about, I'm not going to name names here, but have talked about putting personal data in or customer data into ChatGPT and look how amazing it is. And then you turn around and say, well, hang on, what's happened to that data? And do you have the agreements in place? And is your data used to train and things like that? Whereas I think there was initially a big sort of experimentation phase, and then people did pull back and took a more cautious approach in terms of what they were doing. Absolutely. Okay, I'm going to move on to a question in terms of if, and again, this is whether it's AI or data analytics more broadly, and this may be a good one in particular for yourself, Amy, in terms of if you were in a position where you have to advise a CEO who might be hesitant about where they're going to invest or how they're going to invest in analytics or AI, what would be your conversation or your thought process in terms of that conversation?
Well, I think right now the answer to that is that you can't not. You can't not invest in this area. And one of the reasons for that is whether you do or don't, your staff are going to be using AI to make their lives easier and better. So you're going to find that people are going, slightly rogue and maybe working off their work laptops to use ChatGPT to make themselves more efficient, because we're in this really interesting space from an AI point of view where the operating model hasn't yet fully revealed itself to us. And we as human beings haven't, it's very much pervading both our personal lives and our professional lives. So organizations are changing whether you're making decisions to embrace it or not. So that's the first thing, is that you absolutely have to address this, and you have to think about doing it in the ways that David has just described, responsibly, with the appropriate guardrails in place, and with a workforce that is guided to become literate in the right ways. The other thing that I think I would say is the nature of what constitutes data is changing really rapidly, given the advances that we're seeing in AI. Yes. So we all have this sort of old idea of data being the zeros and ones, and it's all structured data and the things that exist in databases and all of that. And of course, now we're in this world where unstructured data is absolutely fair game in terms of what you can utilize, what you've got at your fingertips. One of the things that I'm absolutely loving seeing is just how granular people can get in terms of what's going on with their customers, because they are able to access unstructured data sources, conversations, emails, etc., and they're able to respond and react to that in ways that used to be much more instinctive. You were going on a feeling or a hunch about what was going on with your customers, whereas now you can actually drill into that from a truly data and empirical point of view. So yeah, I think you have to do it, and I think that you can think about it in new ways.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about the data. The data isn't just noughts and ones anymore. And I often do that when I'm speaking to people. I often try and use words other than data because it's information. Because data does often, to some people, it's sort of, there's a bit of a recoil, in terms of its numbers, it's zeros and ones. I don't get that. But you're absolutely right. It's all of the information, unstructured data. It's all sorts of organization, all sorts of data that will exist around an organization and elsewhere. And it's extracting the maximum value from all of that. And if you limit yourself to thinking about numbers, you're only going to be able to look at the surface story in that respect. I'm actually going to touch, there's a question that you raised there that really made me think, and Paul, you're probably the perfect person for this question. In the education space, I mean, I say this as a father of children and going through leaving certificate and degrees at the moment. How do you manage that dilemma in terms of embracing a new tool, but making sure that you're still getting the full value from education?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think I've been at a number of events where David has spoken. He probably gets this more than anyone, but I mean, as a sector, it's probably the most paranoid at the moment about what AI can and can't do. Is it good or is it bad? And similar to you, I see it with my own kids. I have one in university, and it's down to the lecturer as to how they embrace AI or not. And so she's confused every day when she's being told to, reference it, include it in your projects, include it in your dissertation. And then other lecturers are saying, if I'm checking for AI and anything that comes in, and you will fail if it's used. So there's a very kind of confused kind of mantra, and the same in second level to a degree. Some teachers are embracing it within classes, others are kind of slapping it down. So that needs to kind of progress quite significantly. I know the department have opened up a number of projects to try and understand better how they can embrace it, but that's going to move at a pace that probably isn't fit for purpose. In our world, it's funny, adaptive AI especially offers so much potential for learners. We see a number of people coming onto our programs who have challenges in terms of their learning. You see it with the diagnosis for dyspraxia, dyscalculia. There's a lot of people who have challenges, and technology can really play a role in that. And we have a number of projects with adaptive AI in terms of, well, how can that learning journey be adapted to a personal level, just understanding how that student is performing within a lecture, within an assessment, within a kind of an interview process. And that goes back to your point, Tim and Amy. It's not just about ones and twos. It's about syntax. It's about reaction. It's about kind of qualification and qualitative information you're picking up. So the power and potential for it is very, very strong, particularly when you look at the challenges and the breadth of kind of learning pathways that people now want to take on. So I'd be a huge advocate for it. And again, back to an assessment level, back to your feedback loop, it's powerful. At the end of all our programs and assessments and lectures, students can feedback dynamically online, and that information goes straight to a lecturer, and they will see, are there challenges within the overall cohort, are there challenges within the subject matter element, or is a student really struggling? So I'd be a huge advocate for the power it can offer at a learner level and a pathway level, but it's something that I think as a sector we're still very paranoid about how it can offer value, and shutting down a lot of that value because of concern and fear.
Yeah, and I guess it is a dilemma. I mean, you've got to be able to embrace it. And again, I don't want to go too back into the history, but I do remember those conversations around calculators. Should you be able to use calculators? And then everyone said, well, you have to learn how to do it without a calculator, because you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket. And then look, we've all got calculators in our pockets. So I'm going to move on to a couple of other points that I think for me are really interesting. And we touched on some of this as well already in terms of the pace at which people make decisions and some of that nervousness that people have. And as you said, whether the AI Act, David, provides those guardrails and gives people more security. But with any change and with any transformation, you have the people who are the sort of the advocates surfing the wave, and then you have the others who are just, I want to wait and see what happens. I want to take an approach. So you've got the sort of cautious versus cavalier approach. My question is, which of those is riskier?
The truth is somewhere in the middle. So, the people who I kind of recently been saying, the two biggest mistakes people make with AI The first one is they overestimate it, and the second one is they underestimate it.
Yes.
So it's a question of, look, this is a massively powerful tool. It's so many different things to different people, and it's not like the other technologies we've seen before. We need to think differently about what it means. And I think it's moving so fast that, yes, it's a huge challenge. And what you thought it couldn't do last week, it can do this week. So it's very hard, I think, to have find the right pace, but you've got to try. So I think if you're unwilling to take risks, if you're unwilling to invest time, you will fail. At the same time, you can't assume that just by doing AI, suddenly it will solve all of your problems. And I mean, I tried to make this sound probably more thought through than it was, but I was doing a slide for a presentation, and I always wanted to have a theorem or an equation named after me, and nobody did it, so I did it myself. And I said, like, my first equation is that AI is not greater than HS, where HS stands for human stupidity. We can't assume it's going to solve our problems if we're doing silly things. We need to embrace it in a clever way. We need to be informed. We need to understand. And I've invented another technical phrase where I think AI is messy. It's not simple. We need to understand there will be bumps in the road. There will be projects that will fail, but we can't not start embracing it. We can't not learn, because it would be, as you say, it'd be like throwing out the calculator and saying, well, look, I'm just going to stick with my abacus for a while because it works. And we're at that level now of saying we have to take the time, do it right, not rush in, not get sucked into believing that it solves everything for everybody, but that it is an absolutely massive opportunity to do it right.
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to some extent, as you said, it's the fear of failure. Is then just creates an inertia of never doing anything, doesn't it? And you have to have that sort of test and learn, or I don't like the expression fail fast, but I know what it means, in terms of.
I think, it's definitely one of those things where we need to be honest about it and say it has massive potential, but it will fail at certain tasks at certain times. And if you go into it knowing that, that's a huge advantage. And I think the other point that I'll finish talking now on is that I think it's also really important to say AI is not the only game in town. There are plenty of other things out there that, the data that you are gathering, it may not actually, AI may not be the perfect solution for your particular business need right now. I was talking to a CTO in a big retailer, and he was quite uninterested in technical AI. What he was interested in was robotics. He said, that's going to solve my business problem. I need to have robots doing tasks that I can't get humans to do. And he said, if you want to call that AI, that's fine, but it's not AI in a kind of generative AI sense. I think, again, we need to make sure that we understand the differences across sectors. The focus shouldn't be AI is a tool. We shouldn't do it just because it's cool to do AI. We need to be using our data to build our AI to solve our problems.
So it comes back to purpose at that point, is what are you trying to do in the first instance rather than what shiny tool are you trying to use? Fantastic. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm just going to go to one final question, which is a very quick question and hopefully a quick answer as well. But I'll go around the room. What's next? We're going to start with Amy.
I'll go out on a limb and say I think only a fool would try to predict what's next. The speed of change is quite incredible, and I think that speed of change is what's creating an awful lot of fear. But I guess if I think about what's next, there are a few things. Firstly, I think that over the next few years, we will start to see this standardized operating interface. We're just at a place right now where we don't know what that's going to look like. And we went through exactly the same with the adoption of the smartphone. So that's definitely for me something that I expect will be next, that the fog will clear and there will be some winners, and we'll all be sort of using those winners. The second thing that I think is next, and I build on David here, I think that what's next is that we'll see an increasing awareness for the need of literacy around this space, so that our employees, our children, ourselves, we will become more aware and understanding of what's important and what's not important when it comes to advances in the space.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'm going to come back to that point about literacy later as well, because it's not just the preserve of the few people that need to worry about this anymore. It's the preserve of the organization in terms of understanding data analytics, AI, everything that they need to be doing in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, I see it twofold, I guess. I see it's going to be deeply ingrained and involved from a society perspective in terms of how we all live. And you could look at that from a productivity perspective, from everything pertaining to geopolitics, economics, you know, anything from, you know, a starting point to a redefining how we all work and we live. But I do think from, and kind of calling on everything said by Paul, David and Amy, we will, there's no question we're going to encounter challenges in that, and that's maybe just our ability to adjust, our appetite for risk. And obviously from a demographic perspective, we'll all look at that quite differently. But I do believe what's next is it is a force of good change. It's how we adjust to that change, how we manage it. And I think I'll just refer back to my comment earlier. And I do personally still believe it'll be an accelerator and an assistant, maybe in some sectors or some kind of roles, perhaps a replacement. But I certainly think it's absolutely here to stay, and it is going to grow exponentially, and it's how we embrace it. But again, coming back to the literacy from David earlier, it's like anything. We've all been burnt in the years, you know, through challenges in terms of economic crisis and many things that have happened. And the evidence from all of that, you know, points back to data, or points back to your point, Tim, information. So it is really around, again, wrapping the right governance around this to ensure that we can all accelerate in a way that makes society and the workforce a better place by utilising it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And I'll and Paul, what's your view?
For me, probably a more early stage level. For me, what's next, I think, is a bit more maturity around AI. And what I mean by that is, you know, we've come through that early adopter innovation kind of frantic phase, and now I'd be expecting kind of more mature type of conversations where people are starting to share where there's practical examples of what it does, and equally where there's practical examples, as David said earlier, where it hasn't worked, and moving that into kind of better opportunities for collaboration, adoption, and mature kind of conversations of the value of it and the risks of it. And I think we're still in that little bit of a frantic phase where some of the early adopters, as Amy said, the innovators at the start are flying ahead and seeing advantages. We just need to mature a little bit over the next kind of 6-12 months and see where the practicalities of it. And equally in some professions where people are using it, but maybe not accepting or being open as to the values it's bringing in efficiency and stuff, because that will damage their business model. I think that's all going to start playing out over the next 12 months, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And over to you then, David. I mean, other than obviously the publication of Kerrigan's Law, where else? What do you see?
So I think, I mean, I get this question. I think it's become a standard now. I expect it at the end of every speech I give. Somebody puts up their hand and says, oh yeah, AI is great. What's next? And I think, you know, they expect me to say, oh, it's going to be DNA, it's going to be robotics, it's going to be quantum. And I think, yes, they're all important. But my simple answer now is, what's next is more AI.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to more of that. And as you say, I'm sure the robotics and the quantum computing are in there as well. Look, I've really enjoyed this conversation, so I really want to thank you all for your time. And it's very generous. I know you're all very busy, so very generous of you to share your time with us. So thank you once again to David, to Jack, to Amy, and to Paul. So I really appreciate you. So thank you. Over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to introduce some recent work that we conducted into decision-making and organisational data maturity in Ireland. And I'll walk you through what we found, why it matters, and what it means for business. And let's start with an undeniable truth. Data and analytics are no longer optional. Organisations that invest in these areas do tend to outperform their competitors, whether it's through identifying new revenue streams, optimizing processes, or developing new products and services. And there's a quote here that really resonates for me, which is that embracing analytics is now non-negotiable for business. This is a strong statement, but it's one that's backed by evidence. And recent data from the Dublin Chamber of Commerce highlighted a stark reality with business failures increasing by 54%. Beyond financial performance, data management also has regulatory implications. And data protection laws are not just for large multinationals, they affect businesses of all sizes. And companies that fail to comply with GDPR and other regulations are facing significant fines, with the cost of non-compliance rising. So when you layer onto this the rapid development of AI, which we've been talking about a lot this morning, and again, I'll reiterate that AI is not separate from data and analytics. It's very much an extension of it and part of it. AI thrives on data and its effectiveness and is tied directly to the quality of that data. This means that organizations really do need to understand where they are, understand their own data maturity, and understand and anticipate how AI will help shape their industry. So at isquared, we wanted to get a clearer picture of how businesses in Ireland are using data at this point in time. So we conducted a survey speaking to over 400 business leaders from across Ireland, across multiple industries. And importantly, we didn't just try and speak to the data leaders, the data experts. We wanted to speak to the organisations as a whole, to be organisation-wide. So we deliberately spoke to a number of different roles and different seniorities. Around about 1/3 of the respondents were also C-level executives. So we wanted to get a picture of where businesses and people thought that their businesses were, but not just from those who were maybe closest to the data. And one of the key questions that we asked people was about the future role of data and analytics in business. And the responses were overwhelmingly clear. Decision-making is at the heart of data's value. And there was a lot of good discussion about that in the panel session just now. Yes, words like efficiency, productivity, competitiveness all come out and are common. But more than anything, the respondents emphasised decision-making, better decision-making. And that reinforces the core belief that we have at isquared, that data is ultimately about making better decisions. If an organisation is not leveraging data to drive more effective decision-making, it's missing the opportunity. We also asked respondents how important data literacy is to their role. The response, well, over 85% of people acknowledged that understanding and analysing data was at least somewhat important, but over 60% saying that it was very or extremely important in terms of their roles. And then we explored the advantages. So what do people expect if they're able to improve their approach to data and analytics? So this is, what do they expect from their starting point? So remember, some people are at different places along that journey. And again, while efficiency and productivity are expected outcomes, they're very much table stakes in terms of what you should be seeing. What really did stand out for me was when we looked at this and saw that better decision-making was cited as one of the more important benefits. So we asked organisations to rate their own level of data maturity on a scale of 1 to 10. And the average score here was at 6.9. And here's how that broke down. 12.5% of people are what we would describe as foundational. So little or no, or perhaps at the early stages in terms of understanding how to use data. 2/3 fell into a progressing category. So there's some maturity and practices in terms of what they're doing, but certainly not optimized and not making the most of the opportunity at this point. And less than 1 in 5 would describe themselves as excelling in their data capabilities. Breaking this down further, we looked at a number of key components of data maturities. Organizations that tended to rate themselves well in terms of privacy and security, and they felt confident in a culture around data. But when it came to having a clear strategy, or accessibility, that tended to score towards at a slightly lower end. And again, just accessibility came out so many times when we talked about that earlier this morning. When you go beyond that and then also look at the correlations between those components and overall data maturity, the standout was actually data quality, followed by tools and technology and data literacy. And that's really important because those are fundamental building blocks. And again, echoing much of what we've just been talking about, absolutely crucial in terms of ensuring that you're not in a, well, garbage in, garbage out, as we said a number of times already. And for me personally, I've spent much of my career focused on rigor and high standards of data quality. So this very much rings true to me in that respect. Organizations have data, but they struggle to integrate it and to extract value from it. The real challenge is not just having data, but it's about making it usable and ensuring that it leads to meaningful action. From this research, we identified really, there was 3 key themes that jumped out. One is the first, that 25% of organizations have embedded data to some extent into their decision-making. And I'll add that that's slightly different to those that maybe saw themselves as excelling earlier. It's about whether they're actually using it within their decision-making, because you can be using it within your decision-making, but maybe not to the best, most optimum opportunity. 1 in 3 businesses are stuck and very much hamstrung by inertia. And in those cases, they're aware of data's potential, but unsure as how to move forward or how to get value from it. And again, David talked earlier about when we're talking about AI is difficult. And that's part of the challenge, is to sort of, how do you simplify it? Over 60% struggle with execution, which becomes a real challenge. Facing barriers, whether that is unclear approaches, accessibility again, and outdated tools. So this paints a picture of businesses that recognize the importance of data, but face significant roadblocks in terms of using it effectively. And often these roadblocks stem from one thing, and that's complexity. So our research identified 3 main barriers preventing organizations from making the best use of data. So those areas are data foundations, capabilities, and leadership alignment. So in terms of foundations, organizations do struggle with siloed data, poor quality, governance issues, and it does make it difficult to generate reliable insights in that respect. And then from a capabilities point of view, a lack of skills or outdated tools, again, we'll come back to that literacy point, and insufficient investments in technology prevent businesses from fully leveraging the opportunity. And finally, leadership alignment. And yes, you've got to get those first 2 bits done right. There is a resistance to change in many cases. Return on investment can be unclear. I'll always say, from a return on investment point of view, start small, start trying to demonstrate small improvements, but also don't try and create the most complex models in terms of understanding return on investment. See where and how you can deliver value. And these barriers all contribute to inertia. Many organizations see the value of data, but they just don't know what the next steps are in terms of how to address that. Through our research, we identified 4 organizational segments that are quite distinct based on their data maturity. And they are the powerhouses, accelerators, navigators, and opportunists. Let's start going through these one by one. Firstly, with the powerhouses. These companies are highly mature. They're averaging about 8.7 out of 10. If you remember, the average was 6.9. They tend to be larger organizations. They often will have a data strategy in place, and they're closer to the forefront in terms of data maturity and decision making. They're often investing heavily in analytics and data, and they are likely to have started a meaningful journey in terms of understanding how they're going to extract value from AI in terms of all of their working practices. However, they still struggle, and some of the challenges that are bigger for them really revolve around accessibility and siloed data, which completely makes it harder to unlock the full potential and value that they could achieve. If we then look at the accelerators, they average 7.5 out of 10. They're still slightly ahead of the curve. They're medium to large businesses, and they understand data's value, but they need clear strategies and tools. They're on a strong trajectory towards data maturity, but they often face gaps in terms of execution. So whether that's in terms of getting that leadership buy-in, staff training, or implementing new tools. So the navigators tend to be Small to medium businesses, they're averaging 6.1 out of 10, and they see some benefits from data, but they lack a strategic focus and any real advanced capabilities. And they often tend to use data in more of an ad hoc sense, without any real structure. And their key challenges is moving from, if you like, an intuition-based approach to decision-making to something that is based on more empirical evidence. Okay, and then that brings us to the opportunists, who are smaller organisations where data is not yet central to decision-making, hence the lower rating of 4. They're organisations that rely on intuition, and data only really plays a minor role for these organisations. The opportunity for them really is to understand what are the practical steps, the practical small steps that they can take that will give them an advantage, without overwhelming what they do at the moment, or their teams or their organisations. And when you look at these 4 categories as a whole, understanding which category your organisation fits into is really important in terms of you understanding how to take those next steps in terms of really realising the benefits that you can see. Because the actions that an opportunist or a navigator need to take to be able to move to the next step are absolutely different from the actions that an accelerator would need to take to become a powerhouse. So it's very important to understand where you are at this point in time, in terms of what you do next. And this brings us all back to our central theme, which is about making better decisions. And our research reinforces the fact that data is not just a tool, it's a strategic asset that informs every level of decision-making. To support organisations in unlocking insight and driving advantage, it's important to first understand the building blocks to deliver. And this returns to the themes that we saw earlier. The foundations are critical, and without these, it doesn't matter how good the tools or the skill sets are. That old adage, which we've heard several times now today, of garbage in, garbage out, very much applies just as much today as it always did, whether we're talking about poor quality CRM data or inherent biases in AI training data sets. And a data strategy is then needed as a plan that will help the business realise the gains from AI and analytics to help execute on the broader strategic plan for the organisation. To help organisations navigate these challenges, we've developed a 3-stage framework: uncover, create, and build. So uncover is about helping organisations understand the business-wide needs, identifying the challenges and assessing and understanding which of those needs and challenges will deliver the greatest value to the business and how. And then moving on to the creation phase, which is very much about exploring the art of the possible and ideating around evolutionary solutions. And then we land on the build phase, which is then when a lot of the hard work happens in terms of the business casing and the development of an actionable strategy, which then can then be implemented to deliver the value from data. And at its core, this approach recognises that you don't need to boil the ocean. The key is identifying quick wins and building momentum, rather than aiming for perfection from day one. To wrap up, there's a few key takeaways that I want to leave you with. Data-driven decision-making provides real measurable value, but only if organisations move beyond awareness and into execution. Strong foundations are critical. Without them, even the best tools won't be able to realise the advantages. And data literacy is a high priority, and leaders must invest in making this a focus for the entire organisation. Investments in data analytics and AI must be strategic and mustn't just be a response to the latest trends. And this goes back to the whole idea about purpose. You need to understand what you're trying to do, not which tools that you want to use. And most importantly, the data strategy and those initiatives need to align with the business strategy as a whole in order to be able to deliver on the broader business goals. So as we move forward, the responsibility for embedding data-driven decision-making does not rest solely with the IT or data teams. It's a leadership priority. And leaders must foster a culture where data literacy is valued, where insights are acted upon, and where strategic use of data aligns with business needs. So thank you all very much for your time today. We'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. And if you are interested to see where you stand in terms of the organisational segments and what the next steps are that you take, we'll be sharing a link to the tool with some personalised reports to follow. So thank you very much.